much. Folks, I'm going to go ahead and say it. Cancel culture has gone too far.
This came after CBS announced that The Late Show will end next May.
Over the weekend, it sunk in that they're killing off our show. But they made one mistake. They left me alive.
Colbert questioned the network's purely financial decision, noting the show's popular ratings.
They clarified that the cancellation was purely a financial decision. But how could it purely be a financial decision if The Late Show is #1 in ratings? Over the weekend, somebody at CBS followed up their gracious press release with a gracious anonymous leak saying they pulled the plug on our show because of losses pegged between $40 million and $50 million a year. 40 million's a big number. I could see us losing $24 million, but where would Paramount have possibly spent the other $16 million? Oh, yeah.
He also fired back at Trump's post celebrating the decision.
How dare you, sir? Would an untalented man be able to compose the following satirical witticism? Go yourself.
Picture this. Stephen Colbert, the king of late night, the man who turned politics into comedy gold, suddenly canceled. We're talking about a host with Emmys stacked higher than CBS's ratings charts, a fan base that worships him, and monologues that made presidents sweat. One day he's giving heartfelt speeches. The next day whispers say he's out. Done. Was it Trump finally getting his revenge? Was CBS drowning in debt and looking for someone to cut? Or was Colbert just too powerful, too expensive, too unfiltered for the network to handle? This isn't just a cancellation. It's a showdown between money, politics, and Hollywood's late-night empire. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. So smash that subscribe button, drop your theories in the comments, and buckle up, because this cancellation story is just heating up. Stephen Colbert's story isn't just about late-night comedy. It's about a guy who outsmarted the entire industry. He first blew up with The Colbert Report, where he played that over-the-top parody of a conservative pundit. It was sharp, it was fearless, and it made him a household name. For nearly a decade, he wasn't just making jokes, he was shaping conversations. People tuned in not just to laugh, but to see how he'd spin the headlines into comedy gold. Then came 2015. David Letterman retired, and CBS made a bold move. They handed The Late Show to Colbert. It was a huge gamble. Could this political satirist really step into Letterman's legendary shoes? At first, the transition looked rocky. Jimmy Fallon was dominating with silly games, lip-sync battles, and a lighter tone that seemed to match the times. But then, 2016 happened. Trump stormed onto the scene. Politics became unavoidable, and suddenly Colbert's voice wasn't just funny. It was essential. He leaned into the chaos. Every night, Colbert turned the day's scandals into sharp monologues that people couldn't stop sharing. And it wasn't just roasting. He brought heart, too. When tragedy struck, when the world felt heavy, Colbert could pause the jokes and deliver something raw, something real, that made audiences feel seen. By 2017, the gamble had paid off. Colbert overtook Fallon and became #1 in late night. Not for a week, not for a month, but consistently, year after year. He built a reputation as the guy who could balance comedy, politics, and humanity all in one show. And that's what makes this next part so shocking. Colbert wasn't some host slipping in ratings. He wasn't fading out of relevance. He was sitting comfortably on top of the late-night throne, which is exactly why the whispers of cancellation feel less like business and more like a mystery waiting to be solved. July 16th, 2025, the day everything changed. Stephen Colbert wasn't in a boardroom. He wasn't on a stage. He wasn't even in New York. He was halfway across the world, on vacation in Greece. The sun was setting over the water. He had a chilled glass of rosé in hand and a plate of spanakopita in front of him. After years of grinding night after night, this was the reset he thought he had earned. Then his phone rang. On the other end, His longtime manager, Baby Doll Dixon. Colbert answered with a smile, expecting small talk or maybe even more good news after his big Emmy moment. But instead, Baby Doll hit him with a sentence that stopped everything. "Stephen, it's over." Just like that. No build-up, no soft landing, canceled. And before Colbert could even respond, before he could wrap his head around what he'd just heard, his wife Evie, sitting across the table, read it all over his face. She didn't need to hear the call. She didn't need an explanation. She just looked at him and said quietly, "You got canceled, didn't you?" That's how obvious the weight of those words was. That's how quickly the shock settled in. But here's where it gets even more brutal. CBS had been planning this in silence, behind closed doors, running their numbers, working their strategy, keeping it airtight. No leaks, no hints, no warning. They waited until he was away, until he was disconnected from the studio, until the Emmy glow had faded into vacation bliss. And then they dropped it. Not before his trip, not before he could say goodbye. They let him enjoy the calm, and then cut him off at the knees. The next morning, reality hit harder. Colbert had to do something even more painful than hearing the news himself. He had to tell his staff. This was the same team that had stood by him since day one, that had written the jokes, produced the monologues, and carried the show to the very top of late night. People who believed the job was secure, who thought they were still riding high on success. He walked into that meeting with the weight of the world on his shoulders. And for once, Stephen Colbert, the man known for words, for wit, for turning chaos into comedy, had nothing. He stalled. He tried to smile. He cracked a couple of light jokes to buy time. But the silence in the room was suffocating. Everyone felt something was wrong. When he finally said the words, the reaction was devastating. Some people cried immediately. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to process what they were hearing. Colbert's cancellation wasn't just the end of a job, it was the end of an era. The staff didn't just lose a paycheck. They lost a family, a purpose, a stage they'd poured their lives into. And the cruelest twist? They were finding out the same way Colbert did. Blindsided, heartbroken, and left asking why a #1 show could vanish overnight. It was Evie who finally forced his hand. She looked at him that morning and said, "Stephen, you can't keep this to yourself. You owe them the truth. Tell your staff he knew she was right, but that didn't make it any easier." He walked into the building, heart pounding, sweat already soaking through his shirt. For a man who had spent years delivering the toughest jokes about presidents and scandals, this was different. This wasn't comedy. This was ripping the rug out from under people he loved. At first, he couldn't face the whole room. He pulled his executive producer aside, shut the office door, and whispered it almost like a confession. "We've been canceled." The words hung heavy. The producer froze, stunned, then slowly nodded, already knowing what that meant for everyone else. But telling one person wasn't enough. Hours later, Stephen had no choice. The entire staff gathered for a meeting, buzzing with energy, expecting updates, new plans, maybe even another celebration after the Emmy win. Instead, they got silence. Colbert stood at the front, shifting on his feet, stumbling over the words. And finally, he said it. "We're done. CBS is canceling the show." Gasps, tears, silence. A family torn apart in seconds. But the hardest moment came that night. The live audience packed into the studio, excited, laughing, ready for the show. Colbert walked out, forced a smile, and said the words, "We've been canceled." At first, the crowd roared with laughter. They thought it was a bit, a setup for a killer punchline. But then he hesitated. He tried again, stumbled, restarted, twice. His voice cracked, his face fell. That's when the audience felt it. Some people started chanting his name, cheering him on, trying to lift him back up. But as the truth sank in, the cheers faded. The room went quiet. No punchline, no joke, just silence. And in that silence, everyone realized they weren't watching a comedy monologue. They were watching the end of Stephen Colbert. When the cancellation hit, Colbert didn't disappear into silence. The very first thing he did was reach for his phone. He texted the people who would understand the weight of it. Jimmy Kimmel, Seth Meyers, John Oliver, Jon Stewart, even Jimmy Fallon, men who had spent years battling for ratings, throwing playful shade, fighting over time slots. But beneath the competition, there was respect, and the replies came back instantly. Not rival to rival, but friend to friend. Jimmy Kimmel went the furthest. The night after the news broke, he dedicated his entire monologue to Colbert. He didn't crack a joke, he didn't hide behind sarcasm. He spoke directly to the camera and said, "To know you well is to admire you deeply." The audience erupted, and you could see the emotion in his eyes. Seth Meyers gave Colbert a standing ovation on his own show, calling him the sharpest, kindest wit late night has ever had. John Oliver devoted a segment to Colbert's legacy, reminding everyone that so much of modern political comedy existed because Colbert had paved the way. And Fallon, the guy Colbert beat in the ratings war, even he broke character. Fallon started with a joke, but his voice cracked when he admitted, "Late night just won't feel the same without Stephen." It was a moment of solidarity that late night had never seen before. Rivals turning into a family, each of them using their platforms to remind the world of who Colbert was and what he meant. The irony? The hosts were overflowing with love and loyalty, while CBS, the very network that owed Colbert everything, stayed cold and corporate. The comedians were mourning the end of an era. The network was just crossing off a budget line. This wasn't one man losing a job. This was the curtain closing on the golden age of late-night television. And then came CBS's explanation. No tears, no tribute, no respect, just numbers. They claimed the decision was purely financial. According to the network, Colbert's show had become one of the most expensive productions in television. Over 200 staffers, elaborate sets that had to be rebuilt and refreshed, a full live band playing every single night, guest bookings, writers' rooms, round-the-clock crews. The costs weren't shrinking, they were ballooning. And in an era where TV money was drying up, CBS decided The Late Show was simply too heavy to carry. They pointed to the bigger picture. Ad revenue for late night had plummeted across the board. Sponsors were paying less. Commercial slots weren't selling like they used to. The audience wasn't tuning in live anymore. They were watching clips the next morning on YouTube or scrolling TikTok for bite-sized highlights. The format that had ruled TV for decades just didn't fit the new world anymore. And for CBS, that was the bottom line. They insisted it wasn't personal. It wasn't about Colbert himself. It was just business. A cold equation. Too much money going out, not enough coming in. But to the people who watched every night, to the staff who gave their blood and sweat, and to the hosts who looked up to Colbert, that explanation rang hollow. You don't cancel the #1 late-night show in America just because of business. It felt like an excuse, a mask for something deeper, something they didn't want to admit. Because if money was the only reason, then CBS wasn't just canceling Stephen Colbert, they were canceling the very idea of late-night television as we knew it. Now let's talk about the timing, because this is where the whispers really catch fire. Just days before Colbert got the call, CBS's parent company, Paramount, quietly cut a $16 million settlement check to none other than Donald Trump. That's not a rumor, that's a fact. And who has been Trump's most relentless late-night critic? Stephen Colbert. From the day Trump descended that golden escalator, Colbert made him the centerpiece of his comedy. Night after night, he torched Trump with monologues that went viral, that trended, that stung. Trump raged about it, he tweeted about it, he never forgot it. So when fans saw the headlines, a massive Trump settlement followed almost immediately by Colbert's cancellation. The theories practically wrote themselves. Was this payback? Was Trump pulling strings behind the scenes? CBS insists no. They deny any connection, claiming the lawsuit and the cancellation were just unfortunate timing. But let's be real, networks hate controversy. They hate being in the crosshairs of politics. They hate anything that rattles advertisers. They hate scandal. And Stephen Colbert's entire brand? It was controversy. It was calling out the powerful, mocking corruption and holding Trump accountable in a way no other late-night host dared to do. So maybe it wasn't Trump making the call. Maybe it was CBS deciding they'd had enough of being attached to the firestorm that Colbert brought with him. Either way, fans weren't buying the just business excuse. They saw the timing, they connected the dots, and the conspiracy theories started spreading like wildfire. Because whether or not Trump was involved directly, Colbert's cancellation felt political. When it was finally Colbert's turn to address the elephant in the room, he did it the only way he knew how, with poise, with humor, with grace. On air, he was calm. He cracked jokes, thanked his staff, thanked his audience, and made it all feel like one more monologue. He didn't lash out, didn't rant, didn't aim bitterness at CBS. If anything, he leaned into gratitude. That was the Stephen Colbert style. Never let them see you lose control. But behind the curtain, friends say it cut him deeply. He privately described it as the hot side and the cold side. One day he's standing on stage holding an Emmy, celebrated at the very top of his field. And the next day, he's on a phone call being told his show is dead. That's emotional whiplash, even for a man as seasoned as Colbert. Still, he never went public with anger. He chose the high road, and maybe that was the smartest move he could have made. By leaving with dignity, he didn't just protect his legacy, he kept the door wide open for whatever comes next. Because here's the truth, Stephen Colbert is not done. His contract runs until May 2026, and CBS has promised The Late Show will stay on air until then. But after that, the speculation is endless. Fans are already imagining Colbert on Netflix or Amazon, reinventing late night for streaming the way he once reinvented it for politics. Others think he'll dive into documentaries, limited series, or a podcast empire that lets him speak freely without the pressure of network ratings. And then there are the bold whispers, politics. Colbert has the sharpness, the charisma, and the following to make a real splash if he ever chose that path. What makes this so intriguing is that Colbert has always been more than a host. He was an actor, a satirist, a storyteller long before he sat behind that desk. He turned a fake pundit into one of the most iconic characters in comedy. He turned late night into a nightly political event. Reinvention is in his DNA. So maybe this cancellation isn't the end at all. Maybe it's the beginning of Colbert's next act, one we can't even predict yet. And if history has shown us anything, it's that when Stephen Colbert gets knocked down, he doesn't just get back up, he reinvents the game. Colbert's cancellation didn't just end one show, it sent shockwaves through the entire late-night world. For years, we've seen the signs. James Corden wrapped up The Late Late Show and left the stage behind. Trevor Noah walked away from The Daily Show, admitting the grind just wasn't worth it anymore. Even Jimmy Fallon, once seen as untouchable, has been struggling to keep his audience in an age where people don't gather around the TV at 11:30 like they used to. The truth is, late night is shrinking. The monologue, the desk, the musical guest, it all feels like a format frozen in time, while the world moved on to TikTok scrolls, YouTube clips, and bingeable Netflix specials. And that's what makes Colbert's cancellation so chilling. He wasn't fading. He wasn't failing. He was on top. He was the #1 late-night host in America. If he can get canceled, then no one is safe. Not Fallon, not Kimmel, not Meyers. This isn't about one host losing a job. This is about an entire era crumbling. For decades, late-night shows were the heartbeat of pop culture. They launched careers, broke scandals, and gave America its nightly laugh. But Colbert's fall is the clearest signal yet that the heartbeat is slowing, that the golden age of late night is slipping into history. So let's zoom out and take it all in. Just weeks ago, Stephen Colbert was on stage at the Emmys, quoting Prince, soaking in the applause of his peers. Then came the phone call in Greece, the blindsiding from CBS, the heartbreaking moment of telling his staff and fans his late-night brothers rallied behind him. Kimmel, Meyers, Oliver, Fallon, showing solidarity while CBS hid behind the cold excuse of money. Then came the timing. A $16 million settlement with Donald Trump days before the cancellation. CBS swore it was coincidence, but fans aren't buying it. Was this really just business, or did politics slip through the back door? And now the bigger question, what happens next? Does Colbert reemerge stronger than ever, maybe on a streaming platform, free from network chains? Does he pivot to specials, documentaries, maybe even politics himself? Or does he walk away, tired of the grind, content to leave late night behind? Because if there's one thing we know about Stephen Colbert, it's this. He's always been more than just a host. He's a cultural force, and cultural forces don't disappear. Now it's your turn. Do you believe CBS's financial excuse? Or do you think Trump and politics played a role in shutting Colbert down? And what about his future? Does he reinvent himself again? Or is this the final curtain? Drop your theories in the comments, smash that subscribe button, and stick with us. Because this saga isn't over. This is Spill Society, where we bring you the truth behind Hollywood's biggest scandals.